Every day, in every city, on every corner, shit motherfucking happens. And it can happen to you. Sometimes you can see it coming. Slide right, get out the way. Other times you could be minding your business, just going about your day. And boom, out of nowhere, shit's all up in your grill. How you take that shit when it does happens up to you. But if you got bank, I'm your toilet paper, baby. I didn't make this up. This was actually in a comic that was released by Marvel, and it is quite possibly the most racist comic Marvel has ever made. Let's talk about it.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about a comic that I am embarrassed to say I have read. This is a comic that came from the Marvel Max imprint. For those who are not familiar, Marvel Max was a early aughts staple of the Marvel Comics, line of, books and things of that nature. Max was usually the place where you would find very gratuitous books, things with lots of violence, lots of foul language, and even a lot of sex and nudity. It was a whole thing. Some people might even more fondly remember the Max line of comics because of Garth Ennis and his Punisher series, which I think honestly is probably the book most people think about when you say Marvel Max. Most people are gonna go, oh yeah, Punisher. Which even Punisher kind of had its moments. Yeah, this is easily the most racist book Marvel has ever put out. I would even go as far as say one of the most racist comics I've ever read. The only reason why I think this book will not crest the top spot of most racist comic ever made is because I have actually read possibly more racist comics than this from other publishers, but neither here nor there. This is the most racist Marvel comic I've read in quite some time, and we're talking about a company who gave us Punisher in blackface. Yeah. That was the thing. So what is this comic? What is Cage? So Cage is a comic that kind of wears its desires on its sleeve. This is a book that wants to reach young black readers back when this book initially came out in 2003. So yeah, a little over 20 years ago. And it's so hilarious about this is that, I think if you were someone who was like, from the outside looking in, and by outside looking in, I would say someone who is not black, if you looked at this book, I would not be shocked if you didn't see anything wrong with it. But here is where the problems are going to mount for this book, and where Marvel is never going to beat the charges on how this book made it past the editorial phase. Now, this is a title where we get to see Luke Cage do what I think people probably expect out of Luke Cage. He is basically the street tough who's hanging out, in Harlem. He's going to strip clubs. He's talking to crooked cops and, the gangsters, the various gangsters like Hammerhead and Tombstone and so on and so forth. He's cutting deals and trying to keep the peace between these gangsters so it's not spilling out into the street and harming innocent people. What is the launching point for this book is that while Luke Cage is getting his rocks off inside of a strip club, a black woman approaches him, and mind you, a black woman who looks suspiciously like a chimpanzee. Fuck! 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 Well, we're gonna get to that. Don't worry. We're gonna get to that. But I just want to kind of get out of the way what this book is about. Basically, this woman asked Luke Cage to help her set things straight because her child was killed by a stray bullet. A bullet that was meant for somebody else. That bullet found her child and ended that child's life, which is absolutely positively horrific, terrible, should never happen, but unfortunately, that is a thing that happens all too often. And before anyone says, oh, it happens all the time in the black community,
don't say that.
White people do the same thing to each other. It just doesn't get sensationalized. So stop. So this woman wants Luke Cage's help, and after he is done piping out the stripper who he has apparently paid for some private time, and by private time I mean those cheeks, basically he's gonna help her suss out the situation. Because apparently cheeks are infinitely more important than protecting children. Crazy. Crazy work. This book, I don't think I need to go any further with the plot of this, because basically the plot of this book, like, it goes from there and divulges into all kinds of ridiculousness and just chicanery, just rampant chicanery. But the thing I take great umbrage with this book, the thing that absolutely sent me over this book, you're probably thinking to yourself,
well, what's the problem? Clearly Marvel hired black writers and black artists to do this book, so they did this. Why is it so racist that black people did this?
And that is where I would tell you, you're wrong. The two chief creators on this book are white.
White, what the fuck?
Yeah, this book that has characters dropping the N-word on the regular. This book that is depicting black people as borderline monkey-ish looking people. Not every shot, but a lot of the shots in this book, almost every black person looks like either a monkey or a Sambo or something far worse, but usually could never be confused with anything remotely human. Not only that, it uses slang and dialogue, most of it incorrectly. Or like it's done in such a way where just like, this is something I found myself saying a lot when I was reading this book. Nobody talks like that. Nobody. Like, I know that some people, I know there are some mad people out there. I know they exist. I've been around them. I have them, in my family. They live next door to me. I've been around this my entire life. I've been black my entire life. And I can definitely tell you some of this shit is just like cartoonish. Like, basically the dialogue in this book from black characters reads like Brian Azzarello does not know any black people. And what few black people he knows are not actual black people. They are black people who he saw in blaxploitation movies and Quentin Tarantino movies. Like, I don't think for 5 seconds Brian Azzarello has had more than a passing conversation. And not when I say passing, I mean like, oh, hey, can you pass the salt? Or, oh, hey, excuse me. That's what I mean when I say that's the most of a conversation I think Brian Azzarello has ever had with a black person. And you can't convince me otherwise. And I'm sorry, but I'm not saying that Brian Azzarello is a racist, but I'm going to tell you right now, he has some very racist ideas of how black people act towards one another and how they talk. And maybe it's racism that's born from ignorance as opposed to malfeasance. But I'm going to tell you right now, bald white man writing this type of shit about black people, diabolical. Absolutely diabolical. This man is never beating the charges, because I'm gonna tell you right now, he did something very similar with Mr. Terrific. And we'll talk about that another day, because I want to spend most of this time talking about this bullshit right here. There were a couple of times I kind of had to go back and be like, what is he trying to say here? There's a point where he says DOA because SHIT happens. And this is something he keeps saying, shit happens a lot throughout the course of this book. I would not recommend playing a drinking game to it. And then just like some of the random things that happen, some of the random things that are said, like some of it is just weird. It's just jarring to see a white man write black people in such a way. Like, I get it. I've been around Harlem. I know that there are people who are like, really street, when it comes to like how they talk. But like, this is someone who is writing this who I feel they just know the Yo MTV Raps version of Harlem. I don't think they spoke to anyone who actually was of the diaspora, at the time. Like, I feel like any information Brian Azzarello does have about black people that came up during, 2003 when this was being made, you couldn't convince me otherwise that, he was working off, whatever his impression was. of black people. The way this comic actually reads, you, like I said, you go through some of these lines. Some of these lines, they read like comics that were written back in the 60s and 70s by white people who even then still did not know how black people actually talk. It was all just based on what movie they saw, what TV show they saw, or whatever caricature of a black person was in their head. Their idea of like what a black person is that is just boiled down to stereotypes and no actual I don't want to say lived experience, but no actual like interaction with black people. This is like, honestly, this comic is, and we'll get to the art department side of it as well, but this comic from a dialogue perspective, this comic is a case study in why I am of the belief that when a black character is headlining a series, that the writer should be black. Or at the very least, if you're gonna have a non-black writer writing this shit, they better be in communication with actual black people. Because I'm sorry, like, there are nuances and subtleties and things of that magnitude that go into dialogue that I always say that if you are not of that particular group, you're gonna miss things. And there's no, and honestly, really, there's no amount of telling you what those things mean that are gonna make it make that much more sense to someone who is not of the diaspora. I'm sorry, just it is what it is. And it's because, let's keep it a buck. There's a reason why these things happen. Some of you might remember the What If Miles Morales book that came out just, 2-3 years ago, where it was, each issue was a multiversal variant of Miles Morales, who basically, instead of being like Spider-Man, he was another hero, like he was Captain America, or in the one case I think everybody unfortunately remembers is when he was Thor. Yeah, y'all remember By Odin's Fade, which was even more funny considering that Odin in this universe was bald, but that's another story altogether. And how everything Miles said was basically lyrics from a rap song. It was like he literally spoke in rap lyrics, and it was fucking embarrassing. And we'll probably talk about that here again at some point, because it's something I've talked about in live streams before. And yeah, we'll revisit that. But yeah, this right here, this is why I am often of the belief that black people should be in the room when these books are made. It's also speaking to the fact that there aren't very many black people who are in positions where they could maybe catch something like this and maybe stop it from hitting the press, because it could be literally an embarrassment for everybody involved. Like, I'm particularly embarrassed for Axel Alonso, who was the editor at the time on this book. He somehow let this go to print, and even was of the belief, if a comment that was left on a live stream that I guest starred on very recently is to be believed. Shout out to Captain Diesel of Captain Diesel's Dojo. Basically, this is something that he shared with me when he found it, that this was a comment, and I'm sure this person, they made this public, so I'm sure they're not gonna mind, but Vortex Bunch commented on that live stream saying that I'm black and I worked at both Marvel and DC between 1990 and 2003. I was friends with the editor of this book when he was a groundbreaking presence in the Vertigo lineup, which was a big deal for a Latino at the time. And thanks to his cred, he was able to defect to Marvel. I think we can all figure out this person is talking about Axel Alonso. Axel Alonso used to work on Animal Man and Doom Patrol at DC before he got to Marvel, so all of this, the timeline and everything tracks. He goes on to say that once there, he initiated this Cage book, and as it was in progress, he showed me excerpts from the first issue. Artist Richard Corbin has been one of my favorite artists since his heyday, doing truly incredible airbrush work for Warren magazines like Creepy and Eerie in the 70s, but by the time he got to Cage, he was in his waning years, and his style became ultra cartoonish and weak when compared to the work that made him legendary. He always had elements of cartoony exaggeration in his work, but by this point, it was at the point of caricature. Anyway, the editor, knowing I was a Corbin fan, showed me the pages and asked for my opinion, noting that this is what a young black man in 2003 wants to see. I made it clear that I felt it was rather presumptuous to speak for an audience that he had never interacted with, and I pointed out how every page reeked of offensive and tired stereotypes. He blew off my critique, and that was the last time I spoke with him. I eventually read Cage when it was collected, as I would still read Corbin's work whenever it would pop up, in hope that he would return to form, but it was always a case of ever diminishing returns. I read Cage and was disgusted, and more than a little disappointed with all involved. Okay, so now that I've read that, I think it's time to address the other elephant in the room, and that's Richard Corbin. Because the thing is, most of the ugly in this book can be attributed to him as well, because once again, every black person just about is some kind of a stereotype. And it's not even just black characters. There's even an Asian character in this book by the name of Dixie, who, oddly enough, in a couple of spots, looks very like stereotypically Asian, like that type of 60s, 70s depiction of Asian characters where they have like chubby, cheeky faces and super squinty eyes, and they always have this huge grin on their face, or something like that. Something about it just didn't feel right. And, and once again, when I read this, I went back, and the reason why a lot of this even came up is because recently Captain Diesel, myself, we were talking about this book in a private group chat, and while doing so, we were like, dude, what is up with this art? And then I was of the belief that, hey, let's go back and look. Let's go back and see what Richard Corbin's other art looks like. And when I looked, I saw the very same thing that the previous comment that I read was talking about. The very thing that Vortex mentioned, that his art used to look incredibly different. You would go back and look, and I was like, oh, it's very airbrush stuff. Yes, there are some goofy faces in there somewhere, but none of them look offensive in any way, shape, form, or fashion. At least, not in my opinion. I was like, okay, fine, that's one thing. So then we get here, and it's like, oh my God, we are literally picking the most monkeyish looking faces that we can put on black people and other stereotypes or characters of color in other arenas, and we're just gonna sweep this under the rug as if it's perfectly okay and normal, and I'm sorry, it is not. Marvel has a history of not allowing the people in the room who would probably be able to let them know that this is going to be a disaster. They have a very long track record of keeping those people out of the room. This was something that was very famously handled by Dwayne McDuffie, the god Dwayne McDuffie, back during his time at Marvel. It was the reason why the joke pitch, the teenage Negro Ninja Thrashers, was pitched by Dwayne McDuffie, both as a joke and as an indictment of Marvel's current creative at the time. We're talking about during the mid to late 80s, give or take, before McDuffie left and went on to form Milestone. So yes, when I talk about, yes, we need to have people in the room, we need to have more people in the room to be able to stop some of this shit from happening. This is the type of stuff I'm talking about, because I've even had other creatives in the industry tell me as much. There are no black people in any position of power, and what I mean by position of power is I mean in editorial and upward. Basically, there is one at DC Comics, but he's only one dude, and he is greatly outnumbered, and he can only do so much. At Marvel, I don't think there are any black editors at Marvel, and at the time this book was made, I'm almost positive there were, at least if there was a black editor, they weren't over this book, because it was Axel Alonso who was over this book, and we all see how that turned out. When someone who is, once again, Latino, a person of color, you would think would probably be a little bit more sensitive to this, but I gotta be honest with you, just because you are a person of color doesn't automatically mean that you are excluded from being a racist, or at the very least, having racist blind spots. And that's exactly what happened here, because I think any self-respecting black person would have taken one look at this book, just like Vortex said that they did, and they would have been like, nah, this ain't it. This is not it. This is not the one we do. And also, the arrogance to try and tell black people what they want when you yourself are not black, and pretty much probably don't have any skin in the game whatsoever, and probably have no real relationships with black people outside of maybe like your one black friend. Nobody that worked on this book is beating the allegations on this one. This 5-issue miniseries that I do not recommend you go read because it is dog shit in every single phase of the game, and is honestly the reason why whenever I see Brian Azzarello's name, I just say, nah, I'm good. I'm super straight on this. I don't need this book. This is probably going to be trash. Just because reading this and then later reading, there was DC Futures End that was, a little bit more Mr. Terrific focus for one issue or so or whatever. When he did that, I was equally as irritated with him for that as well. And that came after this. So it's like, he hasn't gotten any better in this regard. I'm sorry. He's never going to beat the charges on this. And I would even go as far as to say that at the time, Joe Quesada, who was the editor-in-chief back then, also not beating the charges. I'm sorry, Joe, you got to catch some shrapnel for this because both you and Axel let this go. Like y'all thought, oh.
Yeah, no, we're cooking here. Yeah, we're cooking. That's the ticket. This is gonna get those darkies to come out and buy some books.
I guarantee you that's what they were thinking. They thought that they were fucking cooking. They really did. Somehow they thought that this was still 1973, 1974. And I'm sorry, it ain't. Hell, even looking at this like,
the times were different. It was 2003.
Yeah, even more reason why to be mad at this, because in 2003, this should not be happening. So whenever someone wants to tell me, why do black people have to write black characters? Why can't white people write black characters? It's because y'all have been writing black characters and you've been doing it terribly for a long time. Anyway, that's my soapbox. I'm done. Look, read this book at your own peril. In closing, all I can say is this. Fuck Brian Azzarello, fuck Richard Corbin, fuck Axel Alonso, and fuck Joe Quesada. Anyway. Peace.